For centuries, Shakespeare's works have entranced and thrilled readers and theatergoers and have made him universally regarded as the greatest poet and dramatist in the English language. All of this in spite of his humble beginnings as the son of a glovemaker and a mid-level municipal politician from Stratford-upon-Avon. But did Shakespeare actually write the works for which he is known? Some scholars and writers are skeptical that Shakespeare wrote any of his celebrated poems or plays. They contend that Shakespeare was merely a pseudonym used by a presumably more educated author with more select social connections. Those who are dubious that Shakespeare was the true author, known as anti-Stratfordians, include famous names such as Mark Twain, who posited Sir Francis Bacon as the true author, as did his friend Helen Keller. Sigmund Freud supported Edward de Vere, and the poet Walt Whitman questioned whether Shakespeare had the education and background to produce the works attributed to him. Modern-day anti-Stratfordians include actors Michael York, Derek Jacobi, Jeremy Irons, and Mark Rylance, a former artistic director of London's reconstructed Shakespeare's Globe Theatre. This video will examine the evidence for these claims, the leading candidates for being the true author, and try to assess who the Bard of Avon was, or wasn't. Those who argue against Shakespeare being the true author present certain key critiques. They point out that records of the time indicate Shakespeare only received a primary school education and never attended university. Therefore, he would not have had the extensive knowledge of languages, grammar, and history which are contained in Shakespeare's works. Both of Shakespeare's parents were likely illiterate, as were his children, which raises skepticism that a noted man of letters would have emerged from such an unlikely milieu. Also noted is that no surviving letters or business documents give any hint that Shakespeare was an author, let alone a famous one during his lifetime. Skeptics argue that if Shakespeare was the author of the works which display such worldly wisdom, why is there no evidence that he ever left England? And why does the will of such a highly literate individual, which listed numerous gifts to family and friends, not include a single book? Those who believe that Shakespeare was the true author of his plays argue that these skeptics are simply ignoring the facts. They point out that a number of Shakespeare's contemporaries, like Christopher Marlowe and Ben Jonson, came from similarly modest families. There were also no public claims during Shakespeare's lifetime that he was acting as a pseudonym. Tudor officials who were responsible for ascertaining authorship of plays attributed several works to Shakespeare, Jonson, and others. And actors who had performed his plays paid tribute to him in the years following his death, and even helped arrange publication of his works. Francis Bacon was first put forward as the true author beginning in the mid-19th century. A highly accomplished graduate of Cambridge, Bacon was one of the creators of the scientific method. He was a renowned philosopher and rose through the ranks of the Tudor court to become Lord Chancellor and a member of the Privy Chamber. Could he have been the real Shakespeare? His supporters allege that Bacon wanted to avoid being tainted with a reputation as a lowly playwright. They also allege that he wanted to write plays that satirized the royal and political establishment, of which Bacon was a key part. Supporters claim that Bacon's philosophical ideas can be found in Shakespeare's works, pointing out the eerie similarity of Bacon's "poetry is nothing else but feigned history," and Shakespeare's "the truest poetry is the most feigning." Another example is Bacon's "He wished him not to shut the gate of your Majesty's mercy," and Shakespeare's "The gates of mercy shall be all shut up." They question whether Shakespeare, a man with limited education, would have had the knowledge of science as well as legal codes and traditions which appear throughout the plays. Bacon, on the other hand, became Queen's Counsel in 1596 and was appointed Attorney General in 1613. In a letter addressed to John Davis, Bacon closes, "So desiring you to be good to concealed poets," which, according to his supporters, is self-referential. Supporters of Bacon often argue that Shakespeare's works contain secret messages or ciphers, clues left for intrepid scholars, which point to Bacon as the true author. Some anti-Stratfordians argue for Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, as the true author. De Vere was a poet, dramatist, and patron of the arts, whose wealth and position made him a high-profile figure in Tudor times. De Vere stopped publishing poetry under his own name just after the first works attributed to Shakespeare appeared, leading Oxfordians to claim that he used Shakespeare as a pseudonym to protect his position. For his supporters, De Vere's extensive travel throughout Europe are consistent with the worldliness and sophistication contained in the plays, and his fascination with Italian language and culture align with the numerous works of the Shakespeare canon set in Italy. De Vere's lifelong love of history, particularly ancient history, made him well suited to write dramas such as Julius Caesar. A chief criticism of the Oxford theory is that De Vere died in 1604, but Shakespeare's works include at least a dozen works which were published after his death. However, Oxfordians say that the dedication to the sonnets, published in 1609, implies that the author was dead prior to their publication. They also note that 1604, the year of Oxford's death, was the year regular publication of newly corrected and augmented Shakespeare plays stopped. Consequently, Oxfordians date most of the plays earlier than the standard chronology. The Oxfordian theory was explored in the 2011 film Anonymous. Another contender is Christopher Marlowe. Marlowe was renowned as a playwright, poet, and translator. His work influenced a generation of writers, but could he have also been the true author of Shakespeare's works in addition to his own? Marlowe supporters argue that there are significant similarities in the two writing styles that cannot be overlooked, although modern analysis has called this into dispute. Despite being from a modest background, Marlowe was awarded both bachelor and master's degrees from Cambridge University. Historians now believe he balanced his literary career with a clandestine role as a spy for the Tudor court. He also supported anti-religious groups and published atheist works, which would have almost certainly led him to being tried and executed for subversive atheism. Marlowe's mysterious death in May 1593 has led to centuries of speculation. Despite a coroner's inquest, which concluded that he had been stabbed during an argument over a bill in a pub, some believe that his death was faked, possibly to avoid an arrest warrant for that anti-religious writing, or to help hide his role as a secret agent for the Tudors. Marlowe supporters believe that this allowed Marlowe to begin a new literary career as Shakespeare, whose first work, Venus and Adonis, went on sale 2 weeks after Marlowe's death. The argument against this is that Marlowe's death was accepted as genuine by 16 jurors at an inquest held after his death, and that there is a total lack of direct evidence supporting his survival beyond 1593. And his style, imagery, and vocabulary are too different to Shakespeare's to be compatible with Marlowe writing the plays. Other candidates for the Bard are just as intriguing. Some have even suggested that the true author may have been a woman. For example, Mary Sidney Herbert, Countess of Pembroke, has emerged as a candidate. A woman of prodigious literary talents, she had strong family connections to Shakespeare. The first folio is dedicated to Mary Sidney's two sons, the incomparable brethren, neither of whom had otherwise been connected to Shakespeare previously. Mary Sidney Herbert had connections to the source materials of the plays. Indeed, it is thought Shakespeare may have used one of her plays, The Tragedy of Antony, as source material for Antony and Cleopatra. However, because she was a woman, she was not allowed to write plays for the public theater. Another candidate is Amelia Bassanio Lanier. A poet in Queen Elizabeth's court, she is featured in some of Shakespeare's sonnets as the Dark Lady. She lived at the same time as the bard, was a gifted writer, and had a familiarity with the upper class that pervades so much of the Shakespeare canon. In particular, the plays show an understanding of Hebrew, and many are based in Italy, tying in with her coming from a London-based family of Jewish Venetians. Shakespeare, whoever he, she, or they were, wrote some 39 plays, 154 sonnets, and 3 long narrative poems, as well as a few other verses. The work has been translated into every major living language, and has been performed more often than those of any other playwright. As arguably the most influential literary work in the English language, it continues to be studied and interpreted. And all of this only makes the mystery of its source that much more intriguing.